So with secondary infection, like I said in in a past video, it's a lot different to primary infection and it's a lot more serious.
There's also a link between second dengue infection and a hugely increased risk of getting severe dengue. So the first time you have dengue, there's obviously a risk of getting severe dengue, but when you get reinfected with another serotype, you are much more likely to get severe dengue.
So if you're reinfected with a different serotype, there's more likely that you'll develop severe dengue.
So having dengue once gives you immunity. However, if you've had DEMV1 and you then become infected with DEMV2 several times later, you are actually at greater risk of developing severe illness. Okay? And the mechanism behind that, the reason for that, is a mechanism called antibody-dependent enhancement.
And this is because of antibody-dependent enhancement.
Pretty sure this is what happens in dengue. We think that it happens in other viruses too. And this is one of the things that I know was considered sort of a year ago in the pandemic, was, is this going to be a problem? Is dangerous through this. Usually what happens is if you become infected with dengue, and say that you've previously had dengue serotype 1 and you're reinfected with dengue serotype 1, your antibodies will already...
So say you were infected with serotype 1 and then you get reinfected with serotype 1 again, your antibodies are fine, they recognise this and they attack it.
That virus and will bind to the virus. So what happens when that happens is that antibody binding blocks the virus particle from binding to the...
This attack or binding blocks the virion particle from entering the cells.
Receptor. And if you remember when we looked at how the dengue virus replicates, the first step...
And then obviously it can't enter the cells and it can't replicate in them.
...is that it has to enter the cell. You're not going to have replication of the virus and you're not going to get ill. So this is what occurs if you are infected with into the cell. Does that make sense as to why it works well if you get infected with the same serotype? Yeah? They are antigenically distinct, so the structure of the antigen is different, the chemical structure. Have already been infected with a dengue serotype, could be any, let's say it's dengue serotype 1. When you get infected with dengue serotype 2, the surface of that virus is slightly different. So what you get is some of your antibodies bind, but it's not as strong antibody bind.
So say you got infected with serotype 1 and then you get reinfected but with serotype 2, because they're antigenically distinct, they have different surface proteins and the binding of the antibody to these different antigens is weaker.
So if you don't get the full binding of antibodies, which prevents binding to the cell receptor, what you get is some binding, but not enough. So the level of binding is not enough to prevent...
So the strength and level of binding is not enough to actually prevent them from entering the cell.
Receptor, binding, receptor-mediated endocytosis. But what it does do is that small amount of binding actually, for some reason,
And for some reason, the weakened binding actually enhances the entrance into the cell by receptor-mediated endocytosis.